Gabriel adjusted the strap of his briefcase over his shoulder, glancing at the departure board. His flight had been slightly delayed, but it didn't matter. He was going home, back to the life he had built with Sophia, a life he believed was steady and strong. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out to see her name flashing on the screen. He smiled and answered, "Hey you, missing me already? Haven't you been away too long, love?" Sophia's tone was light, but there was an edge he couldn't quite place. "It's only been a week," he said, leaning against the cool metal railing. "You know how these trips are. Meetings, presentations. It's exhausting, really. Maybe you should exhaust yourself less with work and more with me," she said, her voice dipping into a playful cadence. Gabriel laughed. "Fair point. How about this? I get home tonight, we go out for dinner. Just the two of us. We'll make a night of it." "A night? Huh," she replied with a soft chuckle. "You better make it count." "I will," he promised. Before he could say more, the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. "That's me," he said, tightening his grip on his bag. "See you soon. Safe flight," she said, her voice warm. "I love you. I love you too," he said automatically, hanging up. He stared at the phone for a moment, her words lingering. There was something about the call he couldn't put his finger on. Shaking his head, he chalked it up to travel fatigue and headed toward the gate. The flight was uneventful, just how Gabriel liked it. As the plane landed and taxied to the gate, he powered his phone back on. A few work emails, a text from a colleague, and a message from Sophia. "Can't wait to see you. Drive safe." Gabriel grinned, picturing her smile as he walked through the front door. Sophia always had a way of making him feel like the center of her world. The drive home was quick, the roads unusually empty. The sound of gravel crunching under Gabriel's tires filled the quiet evening air as he turned into the driveway. His headlights illuminated a sleek black car parked along the curb, a car he didn't recognize. He frowned, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he parked. As he stepped out of his car, a figure leaned casually against the unfamiliar vehicle. It took a second for Gabriel's eyes to adjust to the dim light, but the moment he recognized his brother, Drake, a mixture of confusion and irritation bubbled within him. "Drake!" Gabriel called, shutting the car door harder than he intended. "What are you doing here?" Drake straightened up, smoothing the front of his shirt with deliberate nonchalance. His smirk was infuriatingly smug, the kind of look Gabriel had grown to loathe over the years. "Just dropping off your sexy wife," Drake said, his tone dripping with mockery. Gabriel froze, a cold wave of unease crashing over him. "What did you just say?" Drake's grin widened. "You heard me, bro, Sophia, and I had a long, wild night." The air around Gabriel seemed to thicken, his pulse pounding in his ears. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and controlled, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the car door. Drake chuckled, his laugh oozing with arrogance. "Oh, I'm not. She's up there right now," he said, pointing toward the upstairs bedroom window. "Getting ready for round 2. But hey, don't worry. I left you a little something in the safe. Call it a keepsake." Gabriel's jaw clenched, his entire body stiffening as anger boiled beneath the surface. Without another word, he pushed past Drake and strode toward the house. The front door creaked as it opened, and Gabriel stepped inside. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of Sophia's voice coming from upstairs. She was humming, the tune light and carefree. It twisted something deep inside him, turning his unease into a simmering fury. His steps were heavy as he made his way toward the study. The door to the bedroom at the top of the stairs was ajar, and her laughter floated down toward him, a sound that had once filled him with joy but now felt like a dagger. He forced himself to keep walking, his destination clear. Reaching the safe, he knelt down and entered the code with trembling fingers. The door clicked open, and inside was a neat stack of photographs. Gabriel pulled them out, the stack heavier in his hands than it had any right to be. As he flipped through the images, his breath hitched. Each photo was explicit, the evidence undeniable. Sophia and Drake, his wife and his brother, caught in acts that burned into his mind. The room seemed to spin. He clutched the photographs tighter, his jaw locking as the betrayal stabbed deeper. It wasn't just one moment. It was a series of them, each more damning than the last. Gabriel? Sophia's voice jolted him. He spun around to see her standing in the doorway of the study, her expression shifting from surprise to panic as she saw what he held. What are those?" she stammered, her hands clutching the edge of her robe. Gabriel's lips curled into a bitter sneer. "Why don't you tell me?" he said, his voice icy. Sophia's face went pale. I can explain," she stuttered, taking a step forward. Gabriel slammed the photographs onto the desk, the sound making her flinch. "Explain? You think there's an explanation for this?" he spat, his voice rising. "For you and him?" Sophia's mouth opened and closed, her eyes darting to the photographs. "Gabriel, please. It's not what it looks like. Don't." He cut her off, his tone sharp enough to make her stop mid-sentence. "Don't you dare try to play innocent now." She reached for his arm, but he yanked it away, stepping back as if her touch burned. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It was a mistake. I was lonely, and you were always working." Gabriel let out a hollow laugh. "So, this is my fault? I was working to build a life for us, Sophia. For you. And this is how you repay me?" Her sobs grew louder, but he didn't care. He couldn't. The betrayal was too raw, too fresh. A knock sounded at the front door, followed by Drake's voice. "Sophia? Gabriel? Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." Gabriel's eyes darkened, and he turned toward the door. Sophia grabbed his arm again. "Please don't." He shoved past her, his movements fueled by rage. As he reached the door, he yanked it open, finding Drake standing there with that same infuriating smirk. "Gabriel, look," Drake started, but Gabriel didn't let him finish. Gabriel stormed out of the house, his grip tightening on the photographs as if they were a lifeline to his crumbling reality. Each step was heavy, his chest heaving with rage. Drake stood by the car, his smug demeanor unchanged. "Drake!" Gabriel bellowed, his voice echoing through the night. Drake turned, his grin faltering slightly at the sight of Gabriel's expression. "What now, bro? You didn't like my gift?" Gabriel didn't reply. He closed the distance between them in seconds, grabbing Drake by the shirt and slamming him against the car with a force that rattled the vehicle. "You think this is funny?" Gabriel roared, his face inches from Drake's. Whoa. Drake protested, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Calm down, man. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." Gabriel snarled, his voice trembling with fury. "You slept with my wife. You betrayed your own brother." Drake squirmed, trying to loosen Gabriel's grip. Okay. Look, it wasn't personal, all right? It just happened." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, his anger boiling over. "You think that makes it better?" He twisted Drake's wrist sharply, forcing him to his knees on the gravel. Drake cried out, his cocky facade crumbling. "Ow!" "Gabriel, let go." "Shut up," Gabriel growled, his tone icy. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to explain." "Gabriel, stop. Please." Sophia's voice rang out from the porch, trembling and desperate. She stood there barefoot, her robe pulled tightly around her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear and regret. Gabriel's head snapped toward her, his gaze burning through her. "Don't even start, Sophia," he spat. "You're just as guilty." She flinched as if he'd struck her. "Gabriel, I'm sorry." Sorry." Gabriel cut her off, releasing Drake and taking a step toward her. Drake collapsed onto the ground, clutching his wrist and groaning in pain. "You think sorry fixes this?" Gabriel shouted, his voice shaking. "You lied to me. You betrayed me." Sophia's tears flowed freely now, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, Gabriel. I was lonely, and you were always working. I didn't mean—" "Don't," Gabriel interrupted, pointing a finger at her. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I was working to give us a life you clearly didn't care about." Drake groaned from the ground, trying to get up. "Gabriel, look, can we just talk about this?" Gabriel turned back to him, his anger flaring anew. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" He grabbed Drake again, pulling him to his feet and shoving him against the car. "You should have thought about talking before you decided to stab me in the back." Drake winced, holding up his free hand. Okay. You're right. I messed up. But come on, man. Don't do something you'll regret. Gabriel's laugh was cold and hollow. Regret? The only thing I regret is trusting you. He shoved Drake away with a final burst of disgust. Drake stumbled, leaning against the car for support. Sophia stepped off the porch, her hands trembling. Gabriel, please, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. We can work through this. I still love you. Gabriel froze, her words hitting him like a slap. He turned to face her, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. You love me, he repeated, his voice dripping with bitterness. You don't know the first thing about love. Sophia fell to her knees on the lawn, sobbing uncontrollably. I was wrong, Gabriel. I know I was wrong. Please don't throw everything away. Everything, Gabriel said, shaking his head. You already did that. Drake, now leaning heavily against the car, tried to interject. Look, this doesn't have to end like this. Gabriel whipped around, silencing him with a glare. You, get out of here. Now. Drake hesitated, his mouth opening as if to argue. But Gabriel's expression left no room for negotiation. Fine, Drake muttered, holding up his hands. I'll go. But this isn't all on me, Gabriel. You should take a look in the mirror sometime. Gabriel's jaw clenched as Drake climbed into his car and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Sophia crawled toward Gabriel, her hands clutching at his pant leg. Please, Gabriel, don't let him ruin us. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to make it right. He looked down at her, his face hard and unyielding. You think this is about him? He asked, his voice quiet but cutting. This is about you. You made a choice, Sophia. You destroyed us. And now you have to live with that. Her sobs grew louder, but Gabriel didn't flinch. He pulled his leg free from her grasp and stepped back. Pack your things, he said coldly. You're not staying here. Sophia's head shot up, her tear-streaked face desperate. Gabriel, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I can fix this. You already broke it, he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. There's no coming back from this. Sophia crumpled onto the grass, her sobs echoing in the night as Gabriel turned and walked back into the house. Inside, the house felt different, cold and empty. Gabriel dropped the crumpled photographs onto the coffee table, staring at them for a moment before collapsing onto the couch. The silence was deafening. The betrayal, fresh and raw, weighed heavily on him. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as the rage and pain finally gave way to something deeper. The first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting an ironic serenity over the storm-torn house. Sophia stirred awake, her eyes swollen from a night of restless tears. For a brief, fleeting moment, she thought it had all been a terrible dream. But the sight of her belongings stacked in suitcases near the door brought reality crashing down. Gabriel stood in the kitchen, his face a stoic mask as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He didn't glance at her when she approached, her steps tentative. Gabriel, she began, her voice hoarse. Without looking at her, Gabriel placed a stack of papers on the counter. Sign them. Sophia's heart sank as her eyes fell on the bold letters at the top. Divorce agreement. No, she whispered, shaking her head. Please, Gabriel, don't do this. Gabriel finally looked at her, his expression cold and unreadable. There's nothing left to talk about, Sophia. It's over. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she dropped to her knees. Don't say that. I love you, Gabriel. I made a mistake, but we can work through this. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He leaned against the counter, staring down at her. Love, he said bitterly. You think love is sneaking around behind my back, betraying me with my own brother? Sophia sobbed, clasping her hands together as if in prayer. I was lonely. You were always working, always busy. I didn't know how to tell you. Gabriel slammed his coffee mug down, the sound cutting her off. Don't blame me for your choices, he snapped. I worked to build a future for us. You chose to destroy it. She crawled closer, clutching the hem of his shirt. Gabriel, I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut Drake out of my life. Just don't throw everything away. Gabriel looked down at her, his eyes devoid of warmth. You already did, he said simply. Sophia's sobs echoed in the silent house as Gabriel stepped past her. He paused at the door. You have until noon to leave, he said without turning around. The movers will handle the rest. Later that morning, Gabriel stood in the foyer, watching as Sophia struggled to load the last of her belongings into a cab. She glanced at him from the driveway, her face a mix of despair and desperation, but he didn't meet her gaze. The cab pulled away, leaving Gabriel standing alone in the doorway. He closed the door firmly, the sound reverberating through the now empty house. By mid-afternoon, Drake showed up. Gabriel spotted him through the window, walking toward the house with his usual swagger, though his movements seemed more hesitant than usual. Gabriel opened the door before Drake could knock. "What the hell do you want?" Gabriel demanded, his tone sharp. "Come on, Gabriel," Drake said, holding up his hands. "I'm here to talk. Let's put this behind us. We're family." Gabriel's laugh was harsh. "Family? Is that what we are? Because last I checked, family doesn't sleep with each other's wives." Drake winced but pushed on. "Look, I get it. I screwed up. But this doesn't have to ruin everything. We've been through worse." "Worse?" Gabriel stepped forward, forcing Drake to back up. "Name one thing worse than this." Drake stammered, but Gabriel didn't give him the chance to respond. "You think you can just walk in here and smooth things over?" Gabriel continued, his voice rising. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed my marriage, my trust, everything. And for what? A cheap thrill?" Drake's cocky facade cracked. "I wasn't thinking, all right? It was a mistake. A mistake." Gabriel's hands clenched into fists. "No, Drake. A mistake is spilling coffee on someone's shirt. What you did was calculated." Drake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "What do you want me to say, Gabriel? I messed up, okay? But we're brothers. We can fix this." Gabriel's glare was icy. "There's no fixing this. You're not my brother anymore." Drake stared at him, stunned. "You don't mean that?" Gabriel stepped back into the house and grabbed a folder from the console table. He shoved it into Drake's chest. "What's this?" Drake asked, flipping it open. "A restraining order," Gabriel said flatly. "You're not welcome here. Not in my life. Not in my business. Not anywhere near me." Drake's face paled. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Gabriel replied. "You're done, Drake. Get off my property." Drake hesitated, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. Gabriel smirked bitterly. "No, Drake. The mistake was ever trusting you." He slammed the door in Drake's face and leaned against it, exhaling heavily. The fallout was swift and brutal. By the end of the week, Gabriel had contacted their parents and every mutual connection they shared. The truth about Drake's betrayal spread like wildfire. Family members turned their backs on him, and business associates severed ties. Drake's once pristine reputation crumbled, leaving him ostracized and humiliated. He tried to salvage what he could, but the damage was irreparable. Sophia fared no better. The divorce finalized quickly, and Gabriel ensured she left the marriage with nothing. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, everything stayed with him. She moved into a small, rundown apartment on the other side of town, struggling to make ends meet. Her pleas for reconciliation went unanswered, her calls and texts blocked. Gabriel, meanwhile, began to rebuild his life piece by piece. The betrayal had left scars, but he refused to let it define him. He focused on his work, his health, and his future, determined to rise above the ashes. As for Sophia and Drake, they were left to face the consequences of their actions. Sophia's regret consumed her, while Drake's fall from grace left him bitter and alone. Gabriel stood at the edge of his driveway one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. He had lost much, but he had gained something more valuable: freedom. The months following the implosion of Gabriel's marriage were grueling. At first, the silence of the house was suffocating. The ghost of Sophia's laughter seemed to haunt the walls, and the betrayal lingered like a permanent shadow. But Gabriel refused to let it consume him. Each morning, he woke early, laced up his running shoes, and hit the pavement. The rhythmic pounding of his feet against the ground became a form of therapy. With every mile, he felt a fraction of the weight lift off his chest. At the office, Gabriel threw himself into his work. If the chaos of spreadsheets and negotiations couldn't mend his heart, They at least kept his mind occupied. His colleagues noticed the change. He was more focused, more driven. "I don't know what's gotten into you," his business partner, Jeff, said one afternoon, "but keep it up. You're a machine lately." Gabriel only smiled in response, deflecting the comment. Work was his sanctuary now, a place where betrayal couldn't reach him. One Friday evening, after a particularly long week, Gabriel decided to stop by a local cafe near his office. It wasn't a place he frequented, but something about the warm glow of the lights and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drew him in. He ordered his usual black coffee, no sugar, and found a quiet corner to sit. As he scrolled through his emails, a soft voice interrupted. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Gabriel looked up to see a woman holding a steaming cup of tea. Her auburn hair framed her face, and her eyes sparkled with a mixture of warmth and curiosity. "Oh, no. Go ahead," Gabriel said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thanks," she said, sitting down. She glanced at the stack of papers beside his coffee. "Workaholic, huh?" Gabriel chuckled. "You could say that. I get it. I'm Avery, by the way." She extended a hand. "Gabriel," he replied, shaking her hand. They exchanged polite small talk at first. Avery worked as a teacher at a local school, loved reading, and had a sarcastic sense of humor that caught Gabriel off guard. She wasn't overly flirtatious or pushy, just genuine and engaging. By the time they finished their drinks, Gabriel felt a strange sense of ease he hadn't experienced in months. "Well, Gabriel," Avery said, standing up to leave, "it was nice meeting you. Try not to work too hard, okay?" Gabriel smiled, watching her walk out of the cafe. For the first time in a long while, he found himself curious about someone. A few weeks later, they ran into each other again, this time at a bookstore. Gabriel was browsing a shelf of business titles when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Let me guess. You're here to find a book on how to work even harder?" Gabriel turned, grinning despite himself. "Caught me," he admitted. Avery held up a novel. "Maybe you should try something less stressful. Fiction does wonders for the soul." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She nodded. "Absolutely. Tell you what, I'll pick one for you. But only if you promise to actually read it." Gabriel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Deal?" She handed him a book with a smile. "Start with this. You can thank me later." Their interactions became more frequent after that, sometimes by chance, other times because Gabriel found himself frequenting places he knew Avery might be. She made him laugh, challenged his perspectives, and never once pried into his past. She was simply Avery, with no expectations or hidden motives. One evening, they found themselves walking through the park after dinner. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath their feet. "So," Avery said, glancing at him, "why do I get the feeling you've been through something heavy?" Gabriel paused, his hands in his pockets. "Because I have," he admitted. Avery stopped walking, turning to face him. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready." Gabriel looked at her, surprised by her patience. "It's complicated. My marriage ended a few months ago. It wasn't just a breakup, it was betrayal, on a level I never saw coming." Avery nodded, her expression gentle. "I'm sorry you went through that." Gabriel exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "I thought it would destroy me. For a while it felt like it had, but then I realized I couldn't let it. I had to move forward." Avery smiled softly. "And you're doing it. Moving forward, I mean." Gabriel studied her for a moment. "You make it easier," he said honestly. Her cheeks flushed, and she laughed lightly. "Well, good. Everyone needs someone in their corner." As months turned into a year, Gabriel and Avery's relationship deepened. She introduced him to her world, a world of simplicity, kindness, and honesty. They spent weekends exploring hiking trails, trying new recipes, and discussing everything from books to life's complexities. One afternoon, as they sat on a blanket overlooking a lake, Avery leaned her head on Gabriel's shoulder. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. Gabriel glanced down at her. "I do," he said. "And for the first time in a long while, I think it looks good." Avery smiled, her fingers lacing through his. "Mine does too." Their bond wasn't without challenges. Gabriel's scars from his past sometimes resurfaced, moments of doubt and fear that he wasn't ready to admit to. But Avery was patient, never pushing him to move faster than he could. One evening, as they sat in his living room, Avery looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, you've come a long way," she said. Gabriel tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "When we met, you seemed closed off, like you were carrying the weight of the world. Now, you seem lighter, happier." Gabriel smiled, pulling her closer. "That's because of you, Avery. You've shown me what real love looks like." She rested her head on his chest. "And you've shown me that second chances are worth it." As time went on, Gabriel realized he had found something extraordinary, a love that wasn't built on illusion or convenience, but on trust and mutual respect. With Avery, he felt whole again, not because she filled a void, but because she reminded him that life was still worth living. Gabriel never forgot the pain Sophia and Drake caused him, but he no longer allowed it to define him. His journey wasn't about revenge or dwelling on the past. It was about rising from the ashes and finding something better. With Avery by his side, Gabriel knew he had finally found peace. Sophia stared at the clock on the wall of the dingy diner, her apron streaked with grease. It was well past midnight, and her shift was far from over. The once polished nail she used to flaunt now scratched at the edge of her notepad as she scribbled an order. Her manager barked something unintelligible from the kitchen, and Sophia sighed deeply. "Table 5 needs their coffee topped off," he growled. Sophia grabbed the pot and forced herself to smile as she approached a table of tired truckers. One of them glanced at her name tag and gave her a condescending smirk. "Rough night, huh, Sophia?" he joked, nudging his companion. She ignored him, pouring coffee into their mugs. The humiliation stung, but she bit her tongue. This wasn't the life she'd envisioned when she married Gabriel. Back then, she'd never imagined herself living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. After the truckers left, Sophia leaned against the counter, exhaustion weighing her down. Her mind drifted to Gabriel. He had blocked her calls, ignored her emails, and left her entirely cut off. She had hoped, foolishly, that he might have softened over time. But his silence was as cold and unyielding as the divorce papers he'd handed her months ago. Drake wasn't faring any better. He sat in the corner of a dimly lit bar, nursing a cheap beer. His disheveled appearance, a far cry from the sharp suits he used to wear, matched his downward spiral. The loss of his job had been a domino effect. Once Gabriel had exposed his betrayal, word spread quickly among their professional circles. No one wanted to work with a man who had burned his own brother so cruelly. "You know, you really screwed up," the bartender said, leaning against the counter. Drake glared at him. "Yeah, thanks for the insight," he muttered, taking another swig of beer. The bartender shrugged. "Just saying, a guy like you probably had it all. Now you're here, drinking cheap booze and looking like a wreck." Drake slammed the glass down. "Mind your business." The bartender chuckled, moving down the bar. Drake stared at the remaining foam in his glass, his mind replaying Gabriel's words from that fateful day. "You're not my brother anymore." The weight of those words crushed him daily. Gabriel's rejection wasn't just personal, it had rippled through their entire family. Their parents refused to speak to him, their siblings cut ties, and family gatherings no longer included an invitation for Drake. He was an outcast, and every bridge he had burned seemed irreparable. Sophia and Drake crossed paths occasionally, but their interactions were tense and bitter. One evening, Sophia spotted Drake at the bar as she walked home from work. She hesitated before stepping inside, her desperation outweighing her pride. "Drake," she called softly. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "What do you want?" Sophia slid into the seat beside him, her voice trembling. "We need to talk?" Drake scoffed. "About what?" "How miserable our lives are now. Pretty sure we already know." "I can't keep living like this," she said, tears welling up. "I don't know how much more I can take." Drake turned to her, his face twisted with bitterness. "What do you expect me to do about it? You think I'm not drowning too? I thought maybe we could figure something out together," she said hesitantly. Drake shook his head, laughing bitterly. "Together? That's rich, Sophia. We wrecked everything for a fling, and now you want to play team?" Sophia's tears spilled over. "I made a mistake, Drake. We both did. But we have to fix this somehow. Fix it? Drake snapped, his voice rising. There's no fixing this. Gabriel's moved on, and we're left with the scraps. Do you think he even thinks about us? Because I guarantee he doesn't. Sophia buried her face in her hands. I just want my life back. Drake leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, well, good luck with that. As the weeks turned into months, their situations only worsened. Drake's attempts to find work were met with rejection after rejection. He took on odd jobs, delivering packages, cleaning offices, anything to keep himself afloat. Each task felt like a slap to his once proud ego, a reminder of how far he'd fallen. Sophia's life was no better. She worked double shifts at the diner, barely making enough to cover rent and utilities. The loneliness was unbearable. Friends she had once confided in avoided her, either out of loyalty to Gabriel or disdain for her actions. One particularly cold night, her power was shut off. She sat in the dark, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring at the eviction notice on her coffee table. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a promotional email for a luxury store she used to shop at. The irony was cruel. Her mind wandered to Gabriel again. She remembered their early days together, the vacations, the quiet nights on the couch, the way he used to look at her like she was his entire world. That look had disappeared long before the affair, but the memory of it haunted her. One day, out of sheer desperation, Sophia wrote Gabriel a letter. She poured her heart onto the pages, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, and asking for another chance, not to get back together, but simply to explain herself. She never received a reply. Drake, too, tried to reach out to Gabriel, leaving a voicemail that was equal parts apology and self-pity. But Gabriel's silence remained unbroken. Their isolation only deepened as time went on. Sophia developed a habit of sitting by her window late at night, staring at the city lights and wondering where it had all gone wrong. Drake's drinking escalated, his nights at the bar blending into an endless haze. For both of them, the weight of their decisions was inescapable. The consequences of their betrayal weren't just external, they gnawed at their insides, turning guilt into a constant companion. Gabriel's name became a ghost in their conversations, something neither dared to say aloud. But he was always there, in the back of their minds, a reminder of the lives they had destroyed, including their own. Sophia often dreamed of running into Gabriel on the street, imagining he might stop and talk to her. But in her heart, she knew the truth. Gabriel had moved on, and they were left behind, trapped in a nightmare they had created. Sophia stood in the lobby of Gabriel's corporate office, her fingers clutching the envelope so tightly that the edges had bent. Her breath came in shallow waves, a mix of nerves and dread pooling in her stomach. This was it, her last chance to say what she'd held inside for years. The receptionist glanced up, offering a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" Sophia hesitated. "No, I don't. I just need to give him this." She held up the envelope. The receptionist tilted her head, eyeing Sophia's wrinkled coat and the faint lines of exhaustion etched into her face. "I can't let you see him without an appointment, ma'am," she said kindly but firmly. Sophia nodded, forcing a weak smile. "I understand. Could you at least make sure he gets it?" The receptionist reached for the letter, but Sophia pulled it back instinctively. "Actually, I'd like to try one more time. I'll just wait here if that's okay." The receptionist sighed, but didn't protest. Sophia sank into one of the plush chairs in the waiting area, her eyes darting to the large glass doors at the far end of the room. Gabriel's name was engraved in bold letters above them. The past years had been unkind to her. The once confident woman who used to command attention wherever she went was now a shadow of herself. Life had beaten her down in every conceivable way. The affair with Drake had fizzled out long ago, leaving her with nothing but regret and loneliness. She had spent countless nights replaying her choices, wondering how she had let everything fall apart. And now, here she was, a ghost haunting the edges of Gabriel's new life. She wasn't sure what she hoped to accomplish with the letter. An apology? Closure? Maybe just a sliver of forgiveness to help her sleep at night. As the minutes stretched into an hour, Sophia's resolve began to falter. She glanced at the clock, debating whether to leave. when the doors to Gabriel's office swung open. Gabriel stepped out, his presence commanding as always. He looked different than the last time she had seen him, older, perhaps, but in a way that suited him. His posture was confident, his suit tailored perfectly. He exuded an aura of success, of a man who had not only moved on, but thrived. Beside him was a woman, laughing at something he had said. Her blonde hair caught the light as she leaned slightly into Gabriel's shoulder. Avery, Sophia thought bitterly. She had seen her in the occasional social media post or business profile linked to Gabriel. Sophia's heart clenched as she watched them. They looked happy, their chemistry undeniable. Gabriel's hand rested lightly on Avery's back, guiding her through the lobby as if she were the most important person in the room. For a moment, Sophia wanted to bolt. She could leave the letter with the receptionist and disappear, sparing herself the pain of being ignored. But something rooted her in place. Gabriel's laughter echoed through the space, and for the briefest moment his gaze swept over her. Their eyes met. Sophia's breath hitched, but Gabriel didn't stop. His expression didn't change, his pace didn't falter. If he recognized her, he gave no indication. He walked past her as if she were a stranger, his focus entirely on Avery. Sophia's hand trembled as she gripped the letter. She turned to watch them leave, her eyes fixated on the way Avery leaned into Gabriel as they stepped out the door. The sight struck her like a hammer to the chest. "He's happy," she whispered to herself. The words felt foreign, like a truth she hadn't wanted to admit. For years, she had clung to the idea that she could make things right, that if she apologized enough, Gabriel might acknowledge her. But in this moment, watching him walk away, she realized the depth of her loss. Gabriel wasn't just over her. He was thriving in a life where she had no place. Sophia stood, the envelope now crumpled in her hand. She approached the receptionist's desk one last time. "Can you give this to him?" she asked quietly. The receptionist hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," Sophia said, her voice barely audible. She turned and walked toward the exit, each step feeling heavier than the last. Outside, the city buzzed around her, cars honking, pedestrians rushing past, but Sophia felt numb. She found a bench a few blocks away and sank onto it, staring at the ground. All these years, she had hoped for a chance to explain, to plead for understanding. But now she realized it wouldn't matter. Gabriel had rebuilt his life without her, and she had been left to piece together what little remained of hers. A man walked by with his daughter, her laughter ringing out as she tugged at his hand. The sound made Sophia's chest tighten. She thought of the future she and Gabriel had once dreamed of, a house filled with laughter, the promise of a family, growing old together. All of it was gone, and it was her fault. Hours later, Sophia returned to her small apartment. The walls felt colder than usual, the silence heavier. She placed her keys on the counter and sank onto the couch. Her eyes drifted to the letter she had given the receptionist. She wondered if Gabriel would read it, or if he would throw it away without a second thought. Either way, it didn't matter. She had said her piece, even if it was too little, too late. For the first time in years, Sophia allowed herself to cry, not the controlled tears of regret she had shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that left her breathless. She cried for what she had lost, for the person she had become, and for the man she had destroyed. Meanwhile, Gabriel sat in his office later that evening, the letter unopened on his desk. He glanced at it briefly before turning back to his work. Avery walked in, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his distracted look. "Yeah," Gabriel said, sliding the letter into a drawer. "Just tying up some loose ends." Avery smiled, leaning down to kiss his cheek. "Come on, it's late. Let's go home." Gabriel stood, taking her hand. As they left the office together, the drawer with Sophia's letter remained unopened, a testament to the life Gabriel had chosen to leave behind. Sophia's letter, like her place in his life, would remain untouched, a relic of a past he had no intention of revisiting. Gabriel stood on the balcony of his new home, the ocean breeze tousling his hair as he sipped his morning coffee. Below, Avery was tending to the garden, her soft hum drifting upward. Her presence brought him peace, a kind he hadn't known in years. Watching her kneel among the flowers, he felt gratitude swell in his chest. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from his business partner reminded him of the meeting scheduled for later that day. Gabriel had turned his small company into a thriving enterprise, the sting of betrayal motivating him to focus his energy on building something unshakable. But the success wasn't just professional. In Avery, Gabriel had found a kind of love he hadn't thought possible after Sophia. It wasn't perfect or without its challenges, but it was honest and deeply fulfilling. As Avery glanced up and waved, he waved back, the warmth of her smile reminding him how far he had come. Far from the coastal serenity of Gabriel's new life, Sophia stood in line at a crowded unemployment office. She shifted uncomfortably, adjusting the strap of her worn purse. Her shoes pinched her feet, but she couldn't afford a new pair. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Conversations buzzed around her, complaints, laments, and the occasional spark of hope. Sophia kept her eyes on the floor, trying to drown out the noise. When her turn came, she approached the counter. The clerk barely glanced at her, typing into the computer. "Have you had any luck with job applications?" the clerk asked, her tone mechanical. Sophia shook her head. "No, not yet." The clerk handed her a slip of paper. "We got a workshop on resume building next week. You should attend." "Thank you," Sophia muttered, taking the paper and stepping aside. She left the office, walking aimlessly through the city streets. The buildings loomed over her, their windows reflecting a life she no longer recognized. Once, she had been part of this world, dinners at upscale restaurants, weekends at luxury resorts. Now, those memories felt like someone else's life. Drake's days were no better. He worked long hours as a delivery driver, the monotony of the job grinding away at him. The once confident man who had strutted through life with charm and arrogance now spent most of his time alone. He often thought about Gabriel, not with anger, but with shame. Drake had betrayed the only person who had ever truly looked out for him. That guilt followed him everywhere, a weight he couldn't shake. One evening, after finishing a late shift, Drake sat in his rundown apartment, a beer in hand. The silence was deafening. He stared at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, his mind replaying the choices that had brought him here. Was it worth it? He muttered to himself, the bitterness in his voice echoing in the empty room. For Gabriel, the past felt distant, like a book he had finished reading and shelved away. Occasionally, he would think of Sophia and Drake, not with anger but with a sense of finality. They were reminders of a lesson learned, the importance of self-worth and the power of choice. One afternoon, as he and Avery strolled along the beach, Avery linked her arm through his. "You seem quiet today," she said. "Just thinking," Gabriel replied, kicking at the sand. "About the past," she guessed. He nodded. "Sometimes it crosses my mind. Not in a bad way. Just a reminder of how far I've come." Avery stopped and turned to face him, her expression soft. "You've built something incredible, Gabriel. Not just this business, but this life. And I'm lucky to be a part of it." Gabriel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm the lucky one." They continued their walk, the waves lapping at their feet. Gabriel felt a deep sense of contentment, a stark contrast to the man he had been years ago. Sophia's days blurred together, each one as monotonous as the last. But one evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she pulled out a notebook. For years, she had avoided confronting her emotions, burying them under layers of regret and self-pity. But now, she began to write. At first, the words came slowly, haltingly. But soon, they poured out, an account of her life, her mistakes, and the lessons she had learned. Writing became her solace, a way to process the pain and find meaning in her experiences. Though she didn't know what the future held, Sophia hoped that one day she might find a way to move forward, not to undo the past, but to live with it. Drake, too, sought a semblance of redemption. He started volunteering at a local shelter, helping those who had hit rock bottom. It wasn't much, but it gave him a sense of purpose. One evening, as he handed out meals, an older man approached him. "Thanks for doing this," the man said. Not everyone would take the time. Drake nodded, his throat tight. I'm just trying to make up for some things. The man patted his shoulder. We all are, son. We all are. Gabriel's life with Avery flourished. They built a home together, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional one. Their relationship was a partnership, rooted in trust and mutual respect. One evening, as they celebrated their anniversary, Avery raised her glass in a toast. To new beginnings, she said, her eyes shining. To choices, Gabriel added, clinking his glass against hers. As they laughed and shared stories, Gabriel felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of his past had healed, leaving him stronger, wiser, and more resilient. He had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain, but about choosing how to respond to it. And in that choice, he had found the power to rebuild, to forgive himself, and to embrace the future. In the end, Gabriel's story wasn't just one of revenge. It was a testament to transformation. While Sophia and Drake remained prisoners of their choices, Gabriel had chosen to rise above them. His life with Avery was proof that happiness was possible, even in the wake of heartbreak. And as he looked toward the future, he knew one thing for certain. He had made the right choice.